Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. First hour is general discussion. Second hour is something we want to spend a little bit more time on. Today, we're going to talk about building our iPhone rigs. And tomorrow, we'll be talking about green screen and all the science of green screen. So if you're interested in either of those, check it out. Also, if you're interested in other things that we're doing for the rest of the week, you can go to officehours.global for the schedule. And now we're going to jump into our questions. Bill, what do we got?
Our first one comes from Roy Myers in Bel Air, Maryland. He says, my son expressed an interest in learning Blender for games. I've heard it mentioned in office hours. Upon investigation, it looks complicated. Can you recommend a super simple project we could work on that might give us a quick win to encourage him?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, Blender is complicated. It doesn't necessarily follow all GUI standards that people like you to use. I would suggest that you jump to the free version of Cinema 4D just to try it out. And it runs for about 30 days, something like that. And that way you can get a chance to try the granddaddy of them all.
Go ahead, Sky. Can't hear you, Sky.
Click the wrong button. So I put a link in our event because the early days of learning 3D is challenging in and of itself, let alone where the buttons are. So yes, Cinema 4D is a great tool, but Blender is also free. But you also want to understand the concepts of 3 dimensions. So that's where I put that link in the channel that gives some of the basics of 3 dimensions.
Yeah, and Cinema 4D is in broadcast has become kind of the standard. It is there's bigger apps out there that do a lot of the effects that we have. Like I wanted to kind of correct, the granddaddy of them all is a big way to a big term. Maya and Houdini are probably the two that are used the most in film production. But Cinema 4D is the one that I've used for the last 20 years, and it's a great app. Blender is a good app for free, you can do definitely some detailed things. The things to stay away from, the things that'll get you mired when learning 3D is modeling. Modeling takes a long time, so you can find a lot of things. So look, Sketchfab has a lot of models. You can even find free stuff or inexpensive stuff on TurboSquid. You can even start using, if you're on a Mac, you can start using things like object capture to get some of those objects in there, and then play around with rendering. One of the fun things to do is to take an object and render it. This is what I do with students that are 10, 12 years old, is we typically, the first thing that we do is I give them, I have a 3D model of a salt shaker, or I gotta find it, but I haven't taught that for a couple of years. But, and just put that on your table, and then you have to do a bunch of things. So you have to capture the environment. Usually we talk about HDRIs, and you capture the environment, you light it, you set it in there, and you get the shadows working. And that's kind of it takes time, but it's not hard. I mean, I can do it in a half an hour. But a student might take a little longer, take an afternoon to do it, but it's very rewarding because suddenly you have a 3D object that's sitting in a real scene. And so those are kinds of things that are fun. In the Pixel Core, we took on an idea that you could teach everybody anything they need to know about modeling or 3D by building a series of cubes. So we had what we called the Cube Challenge. And the Cube Challenge was you just have to build a bunch of cubes and make them look as realistic as you possibly can. So we had an ice cube and a concrete cube, and we even had a fleshy cube. And a leather footstool that was a cube. And all I would do is write down a story about the cube. I wouldn't give any images, and everyone had to come up with their own thing. And it was incredible the amount of detail that they worked through. And so, but the thing is you can't just stick with simple things to do that. But little cubes that look like something, like just think about a concrete cube with metal edging. Now make that look totally realistic. That you can spend a year on that or day, to make it dependent on how far you want to push it. So that allows you to kind of limit yourself by how much time you want to put into it, but it's not something you'll get caught up in. Next question.
Next one comes from Andy Carluccio in Washington, D.C., and he says, I'm moving from D.C. to San Francisco, and I'm looking for suggestions on a moving company. Would prefer not to have all my monitors, computers, and cameras smashed upon arrival.
Go ahead, Rupert.
I'm assuming that you'll be moving other things as well, other household items, maybe if it's a full move. For like full end-to-end white glove service, I'd recommend Allied. They'll take care of the whole thing end-to-end for you. But, whoever you choose, if you go somewhere else, the big thing is insurance. Make sure they're insurance and bonded, right up to the hilt. Other ways I've done it though, and it will also depend on whether you're doing the packaging yourself at your end, or whether you're literally asking somebody to come in and even do that for you, whether you've got the cases and all that stuff. Another way I've done it in the past is I have done the packing myself and then hired the manpower. I've rented the truck myself and had the manpower, again, bonded, do all the loading for me. I drive the truck to where I'm going, and then I hire more manpower at the other end to unload it. Everything goes away. That's another way to approach it.
You go, Jeffrey.
So I got a buddy that actually does this, and what he does is he does the container style move. So if you had a car or a container that needed to go from point A to point B, that's where he would come in. So you can have, as Rupert said, you can have somebody do the white glove from point A to point B, but you can also have like the container dropped, you pack it yourself, and then somebody move it from there. One thing he suggested is take a look at your homeowner's insurance and see what it contains, because sometimes certain homeowners insurance does allow you to do the move, and it will cover your move. But if it doesn't, you'll have to bring in extra insurance into play there, and make sure whoever you're getting to move is also, like Rupert said, bonded or has the insurance in case something it was to happen.
Larger U-Haul stores have all kinds of boxes of all kinds of sizes. And I go, before I do a move, I've moved a couple of times and moved offices and so on and so forth. We buy those boxes and we pack everything that matters ourselves, so you can get all the materials and all the stuff, so monitors and stuff like that. I've never had it be 100% successful otherwise. And so we just pack all the things that we care about, and then we let them deal with all the things that we can easily replace without too much trouble. Next question.
Scott Mueller in Germantown, New York is up next. He says, noticing that the latest version of Zoom has added, quote, screen garbage in a form of a recording icon that will not disappear when the rest of the screen controls do. How do I find a link to download previous versions of the Zoom client?
And the technical term for that is actually screen debris. Screen debris. Go ahead, John.
You can use third-party websites. Your trust may vary. UpToDown.com has some old versions of the Zoom client. You can reach out to Zoom directly and ask for an old version. They can send it to you. The best thing I could recommend is archive each version that you use. Always have a way to go back to the previous version yourself.
Go, Rupert.
Additionally, all the previous versions are available on the Zoom website if you build the URL yourself. So if you look at the download links, it'll have a version number, and then you can go through the release notes, find a historical version number you want, and then just go back and edit that in the URL. I did a post somewhere on that before. I'll post that link in the chat.
And also, if you're recording and you're trying to get rid of the screen debris, you can also use something like Zoom ISO. We'll send that out without any of the screen debris. Next question.
It comes from Kenneth Jones in Seattle, Washington. And Kenneth says, RogueAmoeba's Loopback. Could the hivemind explain the difference between the source named Zoom audio device and the entry for the application named Zoom.us? How do they behave?
Go ahead, Craig.
So Zoom.us is the Zoom app. Zoom audio device is their basically their virtual sound card to allow you to get audio into when you're sharing audio through screen share.
Jason?
Yeah, they're two instantiations of exactly the same thing. So I would just play around with it. But in general, I try to target Zoom audio device if I'm doing input, and then I just put it in an aggregate or give it its own channel for Dante if it's an output.
Next question.
Danny Law in Malaysia is wondering, what's the longest you let your Atem Mini Extreme ISO be powered on for, and what's the longest live stream you've done from it?
Go ahead, John.
Longest live stream I've done is 6 hours. I just leave my Mini Extreme always powered on. So if I run into any sort of issues or artifacts, I'll restart it then. But it's been plugged in for the last 2 months.
Jason?
Yeah, pretty much the same.
Mitchell?
Alex suggested a while back that we leave them on, not turn it on and off. So mine's going on about a month now.
The only time I turn mine off is if I'm resetting something, or if I get that gray screen going into Zoom is when I usually turn it off and back on again. So that's but otherwise mine stays on all the time. The one thing I do is I turn all the button lights all the way down. So because it gets a lot less warm, and I'm sure that it's burning a lot less energy to be on. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So with my Atem, basically what I've been doing is for the last 6 months, I've been doing a lot of 3D printing, and it would always live stream to my channel. However, how I normally live stream is I send it to another computer in the house, and that goes out to the live stream. And so what I've been doing is I've been sending the Atem signal through the Blackmagic. I can't think of the name of the box right now. That then goes into the computer and then sends it out. And that's been going on a constant basis for about 6 months. In the last week, I took out my Atem for something else. So that's it. It runs a pretty good amount of time and successfully.
Next question.
Jeffrey Reyes in the Bronx, New York says, when filming with my Blackmagic 4K using the 30 frames per second setting, the video is out of sync. It plays back slower than the audio. However, when using 24 frames per second on the camera, everything is in sync. What could be the problem?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I raised my hand on this because nobody else did. I'll take a shot. But the problem is you haven't provided us, Jeffrey, with enough information to really debug that problem. We don't know what you're playing back that file on, and we don't know what resolution you were shooting at, because that camera shoots at 4K and it shoots at 1080p. If you're shooting at 4K, 30 frames per second, a lot of codecs can't quite handle that amount of data flow of that particular file, and it depends on which codec it's using. So it depends on what you're playing it back with. It could be it can play it back at 24. If it can't play it back at 30, it's going to play back the video slower than the audio, and that may be what's happening. But without more information from you, what you're playing it back on and what you shot it at, we really can't debug that.
Go ahead, Jason.
I can't imagine that this doesn't have to do with the SSD you're using, the cable you're plugging the SSD in, or the quality and speed of the memory sustained that's in the camera.
I think I know what it is. So I think, and I don't think it. I have a theory that you're changing the frame rate in the retiming area as opposed to changing it in the drop down for frame rates. So if you change it in there's a place where you can change it so it records as 20. So you could have it set to 24, but then say record 30 frames a second. It'd be slightly slow motion, but the audio wouldn't change. If you set it to, the way to change that is change it to 60 frames a second instead of 30, and see what happens. Just take the same setting you do, and if it's a lot slower than that, then you're changing the wrong thing. There's a place in there where you can record a higher frame rate to play back at your core frame rate, and that's so that you can do slow motion shots. And so I think that's actually what's happening for you, is that you're changing the wrong setting. So I think that your base setting is set at 24, but you have a retiming setting that is set. And there's two settings there, and if you change the wrong one, it would do exactly what you're saying here. So give that a shot and let us know if it works. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, Alex, when you're using an EVS to do a delay or shift live, would this be an automated process or a manual process?
It's an manual process. There's a person sitting there at an EVS setting the input. So the way the EVS works is the EVS captures all the footage all the time. So however many inputs you have, it's just writing those to drive. And it has some rollover. So depending on how big your drive is, typically on HD, most of the EVSs we get might be 4 or 8 channels, and they'll have 24 hours of footage, of drive space for them. And they'll just sit there and just write to the drive. There, when they get to the end, they just start writing over where they started, and they're assuming that you're not going to need anything past that there. So anyway, so they're just constantly writing. When you say, I want an endpoint and start to play, the secret to the EVS is that it's actually a database, and the database just says, go to this time frame and start playing out. So you can't do any effects. You can't do anything else. All you can do is cut between things, because it's just setting in and out markers on a database to time code, as opposed to doing it's basically building an EDL in real time. And so the person has to do that. There's two different ways that typically there's a very arcane, literally it looks like an old PC interface that all the EVS operators know how to use. And they've got this weird little the controller, and they're really good at it. It's got a little dial, jog and shuttle, and it's got the buttons on it. It's a little dial, and they know how to use that thing like it's part of their body, and so they that's why you use EVS, is because you get people like that, and they can do it exceptionally well. There's also a thing called Director, and IP Director is basically looks more like an NLE, and then you can set those endpoint. You can do more complex operations there as well. So we've used both of those for those kinds of time shifting. The most common is just have an operator there to set in and out points because they're so fast. Next question.
Next question comes from Guy Cochran in Seattle. It says, anyone going to NAB?
Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, I probably will not be going. I looked at the floor layout of the exhibits, and they've certainly shuffled everything around. It's completely different. There is no South Hall, which, of course, was the biggest hall previously. And they've
No South Hall?
No South Hall. Mm-hmm. And they've moved people like Blackmagic, which were always in the South Hall, into the into the North Hall. And so they only have the Central Hall, the North Hall, and the new West Hall, which is the new one that opened up, used to be where the Landmark Hotel was across the street there. So I think it's a much smaller footprint, and a lot of the smaller vendors have gone away in the shuffle because there wasn't just enough space for them. And I used to spend most of my time in the South Hall, so I decided to forego.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, South Hall was actually closed for CES as well. And I think it's because what you said, the West Hall is now open, so they can actually push everything back and forth there. For me, it takes a couple $1,000s to actually get to Vegas to work at any event. So I'm still working on my budget there, and of course, sponsors haven't been very forthcoming on that. I'm still making plans to do that, and it's most likely going to be last minute. But for the most part, that is my plan to still go. And
Mitchell?
looking for sponsors.
Mitchell?
I think the ROI is beginning to slip on NAB in general. I really did like the small booths, and if Courtney is right about what he's saying, a lot of them are not going to be at this one. So I say no.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I've gone so many years, and I think this year it's going to be a no. And the way I'm looking at it, I can get most of the same information. I've always been able to, but I don't think the same meetings are going to be happening in the same way and the same connections to people. I'm worried that I will get there and I will just be wasting my time because I could have done everything that I did at NAB otherwise. And my calendar's starting to book up for the first quarter anyway, really kind of pretty heavily. So second quarter too. So probably not.
Sky.
Well, Guy, actually, you and I have almost traveled together a couple of times in vehicles, and that was the great experience that I just had with Chris Fenwick. And so that relational experience of getting to meet people and have those conversations about jobs, about what you're doing, about the new technology and how it applies to your world, I kind of did that last week already. So I think I spent my Las Vegas budget already.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, for me, my favorite part of NAB has always been a good friend of mine and I would always take the road trip down, and the friends that I would meet there. And since my friend isn't going, and the people that I don't want, that I would be otherwise seeing there are not there, neither am I.
Yeah, and when I talk to, it's going to be this thing that I think could implode fairly quickly in a couple of years, because if we don't show up, the thing is that there's a lot of the manufacturers that I've talked to that are all going, I don't know why we're doing this. And some of them have already decided they're not going. Some of them have gotten smaller, and some of them are just there, but they're like, well, maybe for a couple more years until, they're just kind of watching this thing go out. But I think that the era of the giant conference and convention is probably over. It's next 5 years, we'll see it kind of unwind, because we can do things like have people come on here and ask them questions. And most of the things that I got out of the hallway, I get more out of after hours. So I have a hard time understanding why I would do that again. Next question.
Rupert McRae's up next from Dallas, Texas. Is there anything worth picking out of the skies on free-to-air satellite in North America? Some enthusiasts seem to have motorized dishes receiving all kinds of signals from various satellites.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, there's plenty of great content that's on free-to-air satellite. Usually the national broadcast of your Fox NBC. There's going to be CNBC, Bloomberg. There's a huge list of channels that are available free to air. If you're into that, there's also many of those same channels that are available in IPTV streaming solutions as well, which, a lot of times can be much more affordable to kind of break into. But if you're into the technology of it, definitely setting up a satellite that moves and you have to wait for it to hone into its new degree before you can watch a channel can be interesting and a little fun to play with.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
less and less because C-band used to be the king for motorized dishes and farm and rural areas. And the FCC is closing down a lot of those C-band channels, or they're repurposing something else. So as you just heard, I think you got to go to the more specialized KU band and higher powered, smaller format dishes.
Yeah, I was just talking to someone about that, a satellite operator, and the chaos that the telecommunications companies have created for us is starting to get pretty. I think that there's like some oversight things from Congress that needs to start looking at like what is actually happening here. Like, we don't care about the cost of all of us having to buy new wireless transmitters because they took away our wavelengths. And then the C-band thing is not just an aircraft problem. It is causing this massive congestion problem for satellite. What's happening is that everyone they just took away huge chunks of the C-band wavelengths. And so all these people have now moved over and moved into the other C-band, and now it's really hard to schedule C-band because it used to be something that you could relatively easily schedule. Now you have to really think about it because so that we can have 5G that won't ever really work very well. We'll be on 6G by the time we get it done. It's a bit of a boondoggle. Next question.
Sean Johnson in New York comes up next. What's the best way to get started with Dante? Is there a particular audio mixer that folks recommend?
Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, the best way to get started with Dante is, of course, to go through Dante's certification courses and the training that they have on their own site, including their emulator for Dante Virtual Sound Card. As far as the audio mixers go, there's a bunch of lower price things from even the smaller Yamahas, the Personas, and of course the X32 and the XRs, I think, can take the Dante card as well. So that would be the first start for me.
Go ahead, Jason.
X32 through and through.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best mixer to get started. And yeah, the courses that they do are actually great. You can get everything kind of working inside of software, but I would recommend at least one of their AVIO Audinate, like a USB. You just got to put somewhere on the network. You have to have one piece of hardware to clock to. And so they're like $150. And then you can do everything with software and just be routing things back and forth. Dante capable of software, but and with a Dante virtual sound card. So you could play with it there. That's one relatively inexpensive way to do it. But the other thing would be to get an X32 as far as a mixer is probably the least expensive, most capable, but it's still like $2,000 all in or $1,500 all in to do it. One note there is that there is a Midas 30, I think it's called the 32M, which is there's a core. It's a 1U, and it's only, I think, $800 or something like that.
M32, yeah. The
M32, and it's 1U, and it has just you can buy a Dante card for it and put it in, so you'll be like $1,200 in. No analog I/O, it's just the X32 engine, but it's inside of a 1U unit. So that could be a real starting point, and we used to put those into some of our kits. They're really useful. So that's that.
If you look in the used market, there's still some of the Behringer branded cores as well, single use, and that's what I'm running here.
They're great. I was really bummed that is the Midas one still on sale, right? That's not a.
Last time I looked, it was, yeah. This came up, I think, a week or two in the show.
It's just genius. Yeah, it's a genius system. The last thing there. That's it. That's all I got. What I was going to say is that we are going through the questions faster than they're getting put in. So we'll start iPhone rigs early if we. But this might be if you're waiting to see if this is the day to ask your general question. This might be the day, or we'll start on the second hour early. All right, next question.
The Seven Scroll in Brooklyn, New York says, "Morning, guys. Using Dante, do you need to have DVS set up, or can you circumvent it by purchasing the AVIO dongles? Any suggestions or recommendations?"
Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, I think this is just a continuation of what we were just talking about. So, yeah, the dongles are great. DVS is very, very functional when it's on a full Dante network, but having the adapters is a much better way to deal with a number of situations, especially with the licensing of DVS and the fact that it's all a name-based relational patch. So if you have to swap out a computer mid-show, if it's a dongle, it just swaps naturally. If it's a DVS going from one machine to another, you're going to have to repatch everything.
Go, Jason.
Yeah, Alex pretty much nailed this one. I've been playing with virtual sound card, but my hardware rig is completely AVS. You should have at least one clock.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I agree with what you just said because I'm starting out with a bunch of these dongles, and the idea is that I want to use the minimum number of connections to my studio technology when it arrives, because that'll be the master clock, and then the dongles will provide the inputs and outputs on my M1 Mac Mini.
Oh yeah, I was trying to think through that because the hard, there is the chip in Studio Technologies is there, for Dante, so you wouldn't need anything else. Like I'm going back and forth with my Mac Mini over Dante without. I want to be able to
get into my M1 Mac, so I thought maybe I need this.
You can, but Dante Virtual Sound Card now works with the M1 as of last week. Just saying. But you'll always find use for that dongle. Like I promise. That's all right. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Vienna Tran in Australia. When away from the computer, which bits of equipment do you turn off? For example, computer, audio interface, Atem, and which do you leave on standby and why?
Go ahead, Craig.
The one important one for me is I've got self-powered speakers, so I turn those off. Even though my computer's asleep, I don't want any spikes going through them.
You go, Jason.
I turn off my lighting and dim my my displays. Other than that, everything's on.
You go ahead, John.
Yeah, I leave everything on except for any sort of lighting that I have that would potentially burn out. I typically find that turning on and off can be much more dangerous than just leaving things on if power isn't a consideration.
You go, Jeffrey.
Main lights for broadcast usually go off, but some lights stay on. They're on timers to turn off at a certain part of time. Cameras, all my cameras pretty much stay on. My main computer does get put to sleep, and I really hope that everybody decides that they're at least locking their computers so they wake up to the password, because a thief can come in and do a lot of damage even if you're sleeping in the other room. So always lock and password protect your computers.
Good, Courtney.
I turn off. I have a master switch that I've put on to turn off my ATEM and the lighting that is on it and the mixer. And I, of course, turn off the lights and I turn off the camera and I cap the camera. So in case there's some bright object that's sitting in the room, it doesn't end up burning the sensor. And I always leave the computers on because in the middle of the night is when they update themselves.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I agree with Courtney. I have my little mini Nanlink remote, which I use to turn all the lights on and off. I'll turn the monitor off, the video monitors and the teleprompter monitor, and I'll shut down the camera, and everything else stays up.
Yeah, I turn my lights on and off, but I keep everything else. I mean, the big thing is that I'm on it so much, even in the middle. And what I found was when I turned everything else off, I used it less. So it was less often. I would go to after hours less. I would do a lot of other things because I got to go through the startup process, and I don't know if it's going to come back at the right state. And so I found that if I I turn a lot of monitors off so they don't burn out, but that's monitors and lights, and those are the things also that are burning up the most energy. And I have big solar panels on the roof, so I kind of offset it with that. Next question.
Rupert McRae, Dallas, Texas. Could a Tesla Powerwall be installed in a broadcast truck?
Go ahead, John.
It totally can. There's several different videos and different blogs on actually how to install it into vans. So definitely something to take into consideration. It is quite large. And if you're trying to charge the device at the same time, you have to realize that the top of the van or the truck isn't going to provide enough energy depending on how much draw you're putting on it.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I think the key word there is broadcast. I'm not sure that you could trust a battery system to be as reliable as a generator. Like if you go look at an NEP truck, they have a big generator truck that goes around with them that they can plug into, or has a supplemental power on the video truck itself. But a lot of those trucks are very big, so it would take a huge Tesla Powerwall to make it be reliable.
Yeah, I don't think that I don't think the power, not one, could keep up with a full-size broadcast truck. So like a 54-foot double expando is pulling, like at least 400 amps, sometimes three-phase 400 amps into it. So it's a lot of power that it's pulling into to make it run everything. So we had a smaller trailer that we ran on Leapert Liebert UPSs, and it would run for a solid 20 minutes with or without power, which was great if we had any hiccups. Like that's really what you're trying to protect from is we lost power because someone ran over something. We're going to run another cable, and then we're going to make it all work. And what we did is we reinstalled, and we put our own Powerwall in, so we could accept 3-phase into the truck, and then we would into ours, and then redistribute it to the sat truck and everything else from shore power. And then when we pushed it through the Lieberts, and then the Lieberts are really super high end versions of this because they're charging the battery and then discharging it into the truck, so that you're getting perfectly clean audio, perfectly clean power all the time. So that's what we use there. But I think that the Powerwall would probably not be able to keep up with the truck unless you had my guess is like 8 of them in there. And then at that point you start talking about weight. Go ahead, Rupert.
I was not necessarily thinking about the sole source of power, but whatever type of truck you're building, you're going to have some UPSs in there anyway for the the critical stuff in case there's problems with your shore power. I'm just wondering whether the Powerwall itself provides a better power density, efficiency, space to power ratio than having UPSs in the racks or wherever else you've got them.
I mean, to your point, you could have something that you could possibly use a Powerwall for a core, just like core systems. That we want to make sure that these don't go down. Not everything in my office is on UPS, but the things that I don't want to have to reset during a show are definitely on it. And so I think that is it's an interesting idea, because it is when things power down. We had a problem with a truck that got powered down, and most big broadcast trucks, they don't have almost any UPSs. they are on or they're off, and you have to figure it out on the way out because it's just too hard for them to manage. With what the power distribution the way they have it. Next question
comes from Rupert McCrae in Dallas, Texas, and he says, any recommendations for a 14-inch 1080p monitor with a VESA mount and rear-facing connections? Many units of this size seem to have connections now on the edges.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, any of the desktop stuff, you're going to find front buttons, side buttons. You can try the portable monitors. I know there's a couple portable monitors that have VESA mounts to them. And most of the buttons are usually in the back rather than the side. And of course, they can take a USB-C or an HDMI. And of course, they're also USB-C powered. And then for those that don't have VESA mounts, there's a couple brands out there where you can get VESA mount adapters, and you can just clamp them down and put them onto the wall from there. They'd be about 15.6-inch monitors, but they'd be 1080p 60.
I think the follow-up question that we can jump into after Mitchell answers it is it VESA or is it VESA? VESA mount or VESA mount? So we can let everyone put their hand up and chime in what they think.
It's VESA. Neither VESA.
Of those two. Oh no, VESA.
Tomato?
What was
Tomato?
it? Wait, VESA. Wait, VESA or VESA? Okay, put your hand up and we'll go through that. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Nice. VESA is my word, but I recommend the Z series from HP. I'm not sure they make a 14-inch model, so I'm not properly answering this question. But I have all Z series Dreamcolor monitors in my room, and everything is connected on the back, and the switches are on the front, which is nice. It's not one of these things where I have to reach around behind it and juggle it, but works great.
Go ahead, Jason.
Oh, I just wanted to chime in. I say VESA.
You spell it out. That's way
acronym
too hard.
approach.
You're working way too hard. That's all I'm saying. I have VESA. I don't know if it's right. I'm literally asking because I don't know what the right pronunciation is. Go ahead, Sky.
I'm going to say neither. It's a tomato.
Oh. Anyway, go ahead, Jeffrey.
Since it's an acronym, you could probably do whatever you want. One more thing I wanted to mention, that is, you could also go through some of the do-it-yourself and take an old laptop monitor and turn it into a mounted wall video if you wanted to.
But the reason I asked is we used to call everything Aja, but then I asked someone at Aja, I was like, is it Aja or is it AJA? And they're like, it's AJA. It was very clear, it was not Aja. All right, next question.
Next one comes to us from Stefan Fischer in Würzburg, Germany. He says, I struggle with using one keyboard for several Macs and use the display as a hub. What do you all guys recommend?
Go ahead, Jason.
Oh, man, I struggle with this too. And until very recently, my studio had at least 4 keyboards that were elegantly labeled and placed with labels on the space bars. Logitech makes a relatively stable 3 simultaneous Bluetooth combination keyboard that works pretty well. I'd say that's your best bet.
Good, Stefan.
Yeah, this I was thinking about using that kind of keyboard, and struggling a little bit with the hub, which is built into my ISO monitor. Sometimes this works, but it's very complicated to switch between the two scenarios. So yeah, I might end up with this kind of solution.
I have a very inexpensive, what's called a P-Way. It's like a 4-way. It's PWAY. And they have like a 4-way KVM and it has HDMI. And now I don't use the HDMI part, so I just use the USB part. I couldn't find one that was just USB because I want to control my monitors a different way. So I have other things to switch my monitors around. But this is just 4 little switches in front of me, and then I jump through, and it works great. Then you get used to it. And I just know which computer I'm going to for up to 4. If I got more, then I'd have to deal with something else. But that's worked really well. I obviously I used it. What were you gonna say, Stefan?
I'm sure you have a link.
I someone hopefully will find a link for it. I'll try to put a link in there, but I got it on Amazon. I'll put it into the chat, into the general chat. Next question.
Robin Cutshaw's up next from Atlanta, Georgia, and says, I'm using a MixPre 6 and need to add an audio delay for video sync. That seems to require going to advanced mode in settings, but the audio level goes to 0 when I do that and won't adjust up. Is there a magic fix?
Go ahead, John.
I've not seen that, so maybe double check your firmware. But when you're going to add a delay there, I just go into my output settings, and on the second tab on the stereo out, left and right, you can set your millisecond delay that you want to see. It's definitely something I'm working on to make sure that I'm in sync well, but I have not had any sort of issue like that. I would definitely, if you're on the most recent firmware, just try to refresh it again and see if you're still having that issue. If not, reach out to them for support.
Yeah, the other thing you can do is in after hours, if you see Mickey, Mickey will be able to work through this with you, I'm sure. I haven't had that problem, but it could be that that you have a gain in the channel that's getting turned all the way down. So you might want to go into the individual channel and take a look at it there and see if the gain's there or if the output got turned down. The first thing I would probably do is factory reset it just to clear everything, and then go to advanced mode and then start to set it, and you may find that it's working. But if you have questions, the first person I would ask is Mickey in the after hours, and the second place I would go is call Sound Devices. Mostly because if you do it in after hours with Mickey, we all learn how to fix it, and if you call Sound Devices, it's more of a data hole. All right, next question.
Guy Cochran in Seattle in the USA here says, how do we get to see and hear behind the scenes of folks cutting Office Hours 2.0 so that we can learn?
I don't know how that's handled. I know that it's possible. I guess I would go into after hours and ask someone like JJ. I know that it's being managed. I was waiting for somebody else to raise their hand, but I think everyone that works on it is in after hours. There's another Zoom that people are getting onto to do that, and I find this to be a success. Is that I've delegated enough that I don't know how it works anymore. So, but jump into. Actually, you can probably ask the question here, but jump into after hours, and if you see someone like JJ, he can probably, or Josh, or some of those folks, they'll be able to explain to you how to get into that back end to figure that out. So we definitely think that's the best thing to do is to learn by watching it for a little while and then jumping in. Next question.
Kenny Hampton comes to us next from Greenville, Illinois. How are TV advertising editors able to pull a short clip or word from an episode and another from a different show and so forth to put together the desired message? How do they search for a word or theme to get the footage without a lot of edit time?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
A lot of those long-form editing systems like an Avid or Premiere have a transcript associated with a storyboard and script. So you literally could edit using the storyboard or script, and it will see those at specific times. But you just do a word search, and it's going to find it in the transcript, and then it'll take you to the actual shot, and you can create an EDL of all the various highlights from the show.
Go ahead, Bill.
We call this frankenbiting, and we have to do it occasionally when somebody says something with or without an S, plural, and we have to fix it, so you go to another take. If you're organized well enough, and most of these NLEs, particularly since you're talking about working with video content as editors, most of them have ways to tag individual sections, and if you do your tagging properly, you should be able to find all the instances, all the takes of the same line, and if you do script sync, you'll be able to find all the scripts.
You go ahead, Courtney. I can't hear you, Courtney.
Yeah, it's been mostly covered that most broadcast files now have to have a closed caption file, and a lot of software now can search the closed caption file for text associated with, and it's kind of a lot of AI used in those searches, so it can be fairly loose or fairly tight, searching for a specific word, and it can take you to a specific time code and specific file that contains that text and give you a list back.
Yeah, I can't think of the services right now, but there are services that do this for broadcast that have all of this stuff available, and they also can help manage some of the copyright issues that occur when you start searching. But you can search across everything and search for items, people, things that they said. You know, they're tagging all of this stuff, and I don't have the name of the services off the top of my head, but it's something that I saw at NAB, like wandering around somewhere, and I just can't remember where it was. But anyway, but it was. There's definitely services out there that will do this, and a lot of them are just subscription services to the broadcasters, and the broadcasters just start running search terms. I'm looking for this person. I'm looking for these in these dates from this location with this subject matter. There's tons and tons of metadata that it can search against to find those clips. Go ahead, Craig.
So that's what you're describing is akin to what Photos now on the Mac is doing, where it automatically, you can just type in anything to search for and it'll find, even though you haven't tagged the photo itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, these services are done with people typing in metadata. I mean, it's some of it's gathered automatically, but it's a team of, a large group of people typing in tons of metadata against this stuff. It's an expensive service. I mean, it's not like it's like $10 a month. This is like for broadcasters. My guess is it's probably a couple $100,000 a year, to be part of these things. And a lot of broadcasters have it because that's how they get their content back relatively quickly. Next question.
Next question comes to us from Eric Antonio in Washington, D.C. Planning a Mac Mini purchase to restart my music projects. What audio input hardware should I consider for the Mini to be stereo input-output, probably RCA, but maybe XLR? I'm currently using a DJ-style Pioneer mixer. Thanks.
I go, Jason.
This is a tricky one because, if you look at a modern Pioneer DJ mixer, the DJ M2000, for example, it has inputs and outputs galore. A lot of it can be done over Ethernet. Still more is your standard, just TRS. You've also got RCA, and then you've got digital. So it's not really going to help you. I would say a multi-in, multi-out, single rack mount, something like that.
Go, Jeffrey.
It's really what you're planning to do with what you're talking about with your music projects. Are you a music creator? Are you a DJ? Are you remixing music? Things like that. Are you going to be singing into this? Are you going to be playing an instrument into this? All of these are going to be bringing into effect, because then I would probably point you more towards something that has a DAW ability. Something like the Flow 8 will be on the low end. Something like the X32 be a little bit larger than that if you're doing multiple instruments or anything like that. So I think I'd need a little bit more information before I can give you a specific. The only thing I will say is whatever mixer you get, make sure if it does do USB in, make sure it's doing USB in and USB out, because some of the older mixers will only go out. And then, of course, Dante is a good way to go as well.
Go ahead, John.
I use a lot of the Focusrite stuff for just easy grab and go. The Focusrite 2i2, I think, is like $180, but a really great entry level appliance to use to get audio in and out of a PC. iConnectivity is fun too. If you're going to integrate an iPad in, you can connect it to an iPad and a PC or Mac at the same time and route audio back and forth between them, which can get really interesting if you start using some soft synths on the iPad.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
A lot of the low-end USB dongles are USB 2.0 compliant, which means you can probably buy it on Amazon. The results will vary depending on the quality of the DAC that they use in them. I have everything from that to an RME, which is like $2,000, all the way up to a benchmark, which is like $4,000. So It doesn't sound like you're in the upper end. You can do a search on Amazon. You'll probably find what you're looking for.
Yeah, the big thing is getting the balanced out. It turns out to be, like the Flow 8 and a lot of other little mixers will give you balanced in. Getting balanced out is a little more complicated. For straight stereo, the ultimate Swiss Army knife is still old, but it hasn't been updated. But the USB, not the mix pre, but the USB pre 2 is, I think I owned at some point 60 of them to get in and out of computers. And these are, it's a USB and it does XLR, TRS, in and out. It has Toslink, RCA. But it's only stereo. Other ones that we've used pretty heavily are things like Mark of the Unicorn, Motu for IO to get in and out. And so those are a couple other ones that we've used. And then, of course, you can do something like an X32 with a Dante card with going into your computer. Now you have a ton of IO to going in and out of it. So you just have to decide what you want to do there. Courtney?
I would look in the Behringer line because they have a slew of tiny mixers that from a single mic preamp input that have USB interfaces on them up to 2 to 4 to 8, and they're all reasonably priced. And since Midas, they've incorporated Midas preamps into them, they all actually sound pretty good. So, and they all give you, most of them give you RCA outputs for line outputs, and they also, many of the 8 input or higher give you XLR outputs too.
Jeffrey?
And also, don't forget about the software side of things. If your software doesn't work on the Mac M1, this is all going to be null and mute.
Next question.
Next one comes to us from George Butters in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Is there a limit to the length or size of Zoom recordings to the cloud? A colleague reports that what was to be continuous recording cut into 2 pieces with a 10-second gap between them. Is this expected behavior? And if so, can it be changed?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I don't believe it's expected behavior. The cloud recordings will separate the recordings into different types, like your speaker and your screen share, if you have it configured that way. But if it was a continuous speaker, let's say, I wouldn't have expected it to slice that up. I would look at whether that it coincided with any event in the meeting, whether that was somebody leaving or joining, or somebody starting a screen share, or what actually happened in the meeting at that time, whether it was some kind of event. It's important to remember that the cloud recordings also take some processing time after the fact. And if you're dealing with particularly long meetings, that can take a while, even up to 24 hours. I'm just wondering what happens if you try and force a download while it's still processing, whether you get like maybe a chunk or a segment that you weren't expecting. But other than that, I'd like to know how long the meeting was in this case and when the behavior changed. That might help narrow it down.
Yeah, it's doing it under a generalized file system. I think it's like a little over 2 gigs that it wants to segment the files. And I've never had a problem with a 10-second gap, but it absolutely on longer files will segment them. And that has to do with the fact that they're in the cloud and there's different file systems, and those are limited. And so we definitely see it segment them, but I've never seen 10 seconds in between is the thing that's new. Go ahead, Bill, real quick.
Yeah, growing files. I've had circumstances where I've been making
these
a
aren't
video.
growing files, though. This is the
I'm
Zoom
not saying it
files.
is. My point is that without it closing off the file, sometimes you can get a damaged file, and so there may be something that happened that was a glitch. So it wrote that down to save it and then restarted a little bit. That may be something that the coders have built into things, because I've had long recordings just disappear because they didn't have that end of file record appended to them.
Go ahead, Rupert.
If that is the case, the setting in the cloud recordings for optimized file type for external recording, whatever that is, maybe that got flipped, or trying it the other way may produce a different result if that is the problem.
Absolutely. Next question.
Kenneth Jones in Seattle, Washington. The app Synergy is a way to control multiple PCs or Macs from one keyboard and mouse. It seems to be problematic. What other apps do the same task better?
Go ahead, John.
If you find one, let me know. I've been using Synergy since it was recommended last year, between my PC, my Mac, and my Raspberry Pi. But I use it only for keyboard and mouse control, and it seems to work okay.
Hey, go ahead, John.
I think the issue that at least Alex experienced seems to be with the file share that they were allowing to use. I would go through and disable that. It will prevent that cascading error that Alex was going through, that race condition that kept trying to copy one hard drive to another.
It was amazing. Like the reason that I'm so burnt by it was that I've just never seen a Mac. I couldn't plug a physical keyboard in and take it off the network and have it just it couldn't see the keyboard. Like it was the most amazing crash I've ever seen. I finally rebuilt it. It's working now. Next question.
The 7 Scroll in Brooklyn, what's the best behind-the-scenes camera to match with the Blackmagic 6K Pro? A huddlecam, GoPro, Brio, or should we just pray and wait for Blackmagic to release a new micro?
Now go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, it really depends on the size. I'm a big fan of Sony cameras other than Blackmagic. They're going to go up to 4K. The GoPro, I've been burned way too many times with GoPros. I have a Hero 9 that goes up to 5K, and I think the 10 goes to 5.3K at 60 frames a second. And of course, that's going to be a wide field of view right there. But when it comes to doing streaming, like I said, it's tough to really set up those cameras, especially if you're going to put it up in a corner. So I wouldn't recommend that. The Brios are nice. I've got a huddlecam as my overhead cam, and it works really well. But once again, those are 4K at best.
Yeah, I wait until the end of April before I bought anything. Right now, we're too close to NAB to talk about cameras that we're going to buy. But the otherwise, I would still use the little micro studios. Are really great, but they're just really old, and you can't put LUTs on them. And there's a lot of things that are an issue, but they still work. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael's up next. He says, has anyone had experience with the Waves PS22 plugin? I've tried using PS22 Spread with the left, center, right stereo enhance preset, and it makes a subtle difference on synths with a mono output. Fills out the sound without being overpowering.
I have not used it. I don't know if we have anybody here that has. So you might have stumped us on that one. Next question.
Moving on to Guy Cochran in Seattle, Washington. What problems does the BSS BLU 806 audio processor solve?
I go ahead, John.
Typically, it's going to be used in an integration environment, whether that's a large auditorium, conference room, or house audio solution. It's going to allow you to bring everything into a central source, process it, and get it out to the speakers or whatever device is consuming it.
Okay, go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, I've used those for a long time. It's their sound web category of devices, and they're DSP that can be everything from a router to a processor to EQ and all kinds of manipulation. They're recently bought by the Harman Group, which is owned by Samsung. So they may not be quite what they used to be. They're going to be different either way.
I don't know if they'll change them much anytime soon, just because they're just a known product for a lot of people. But they are we use them. We use them for all of our comms and some other bits and pieces, because it lets us build something that would be really a pain in the neck to build inside of a mixer. But we have all this complex routing, ducking, all kinds of other things that are going through there, and it's all nodal. So we can sit there and just open up the interface and kind of walk through it and say, okay, we're going to build all these, and we have mix minuses, and we have all these other bits and pieces that are there, and you're not trying to do it inside of an audio board. You can also build interfaces within the 806 that you can have up, that you can just tap on buttons, and it'll jump to different pages and so on and so forth there. And what I've seen, I have a friend that knows a lot about, has been using these for years, and they'll change their entire studio from 7.1 to 12.1 to 5.14 by just pushing a button, and it literally reroutes the entire system so they can kind of make that all work. And so it's a very, very powerful, and then they integrate with a lot of little controllers, and so you can have a controller my friend has one in his kitchen. You can just turn the volume up, and it's just telling the BSS to change the volume on that output, and so on and so forth. So for integrations, it's super powerful. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, my concern is if Harman does the same thing they did to Studer, it's going to mess up BSS. So it's just me being fearful.
Yeah, we'll see. Next question.
Stefan Fischer in Würzburg, Germany is up next. What distance should I consider for using a 15-inch teleprompter for online meeting use? Some pictures in the ad show a very close distance to the viewer.
Go ahead, Courtney.
It depends. And you got to remember, pictures and ads have to be arranged so that all the things fit in the picture to explain how it works. So it may not be. Things may be closer than they normally are used. The thing to consider is whether or not you're going to put your computer interface into that monitor, so that you have to be, and it depends on your eyesight. If you're old like me and you need reading glasses to read small print, you might have to have it closer. If you're okay with it being a little further away, and the text on your interface or things you would have to click on to operate are readable at a distance of more than 2 or 3 feet, You could go further away. Further away is probably better because the purpose of the teleprompter is to get your gaze into the lens, and the smaller that teleprompter has in your field of view, the more likely that anywhere you look on that teleprompter is going to be in the lens. The closer you get, the more likely you're going to have to be looking up in the corner to see something else, or see something else to activate if you're looking at anything other than a single full frame image of your speaker view from Zoom in that particular teleprompter.
Go ahead, Rupert.
I would just guess at like 15 inches, somewhere between 2 and 3 feet, but it's also going to be governed from the focal length of your camera, because you've got to get that camera in there and then get the prompter out of shot, and then that may change your geometry. So you need to, that often puts you at a place you didn't expect, I've found, unless you've got real fine control on it. If it ends up just a little further away and you're wanting to use it mainly for eye contact, and that makes if you are using it also for your controls or your Zoom controls, and you need to be able to see those things, you can sometimes replicate that your prompter display on a bigger monitor to the side, where you can maybe just briefly glance to see your controls, and then glance back up at the monitor just for the eye contact part.
Yeah, that's great. Bill?
I had some early stage cataracts coming, and when I had mine done, I had them put in monovision lenses, which means one is for distance and one is for mid. And from that point, my entire relationship with teleprompting changed. It used to be that they had to be big for me to resolve them. Now, after that change, I find that I can read most prompters no matter how far away they are, and that was a revelation to me. So it really does depend on each individual, as Rupert was saying.
Go ahead, Mitchell, real quick.
Yeah, whether it's an Interatron, I used the home stream from ICANN. It's very small. You could never use it for reading. I'd say 15 inches is the smallest you would ever want to go to read copy. I could never read copy off this little one that I'm using.
If you're just looking into it, it can be pretty small, but I would say about 3 feet, 1 meter is probably the about the furthest out you probably want to go with a 15-inch. Before it becomes pretty small out there and into the distance. Next question.
Ike Potter in Hanover, Germany comes up next. I recently enjoyed playing with the 3D scanner app on my iPhone. Is there an easy and cheap way to combine models of different rooms in software? If so, which programs on PC or Mac can do that?
You can do this with any piece of software. It's a matter of matching the geometry. What the key there is to make sure that there's enough geometry overlapping between your scans that you can actually, like line them up to each other. So if you do two different rooms, you want to scan another one that make sure that you're cresting from one room to the other, so that you have overlapping geometry that allows it to work. And so that any 3D, you can take it into Blender and figure it out. There are much more detailed versions. The problem is that the geometry that's generated by the phone is so low res, you couldn't use the automatic ones in things like Revit. Autodesk has a ton of these for when you're using real LiDAR scanners, but you can't, you wouldn't be able to use it for the phone generated content because it would not be high enough resolution to match it. So you'd have to do it by eye anyway. And in that case, you could use something like Blender to do that. You would lose, texture maps and everything else become more complicated when you start to do it that way, but the Autodesk versions are pretty expensive. Next question.
Dave Kaufman in Vancouver, British Columbia is up next. We use OBS or Ecamm Live for virtual mixing rather than a hardware switcher, but we're looking for a good hardware encoder that can take separate HDMI video in a stereo mix from the board. Suggestions?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Depends on whether you're planning to capture it for recording or send it back out to like a Facebook or something like that. So what I used to do is I used to use, and I'm going to be doing it again, is got the Blackmagic Video Assist. The cool thing about that is they've added the support of bringing it out via webcam, so you could actually patch it out to something else to send out. But it definitely records it in ProRes, so you'd have it there. I think the newer ones don't have an audio input, so I would also take a look at some of the ninjas for that. If you're going to do recording and streaming, then something like the FFN Pearl would be something for that, but in hardware.
Yeah, what we're using for this show right now that you're watching, if you're watching on YouTube, is the Elemental links. And you're going to pay an incremental cost of $1.50 an hour or something to stream, but they are they're just set and forget. You have it control over the web. You can send it anywhere and make it work, and the quality is higher than the Epiphan Pearl. and which is like I have a lot of scars with the Pearl. So anyway, I would be careful of that one. But the link works really well. You do have to embed the audio before you get to it. It's just taking an embedded HDMI or SDI input. Next question.
Next one comes from Dave Kaufman in Vancouver, British Columbia. In production, does the audio mixer sit separately and monitor on speakers with a live video feed, or do they, like me, have to sit with the video crew and try to use isolating headphones?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Well, I've done it both ways, but generally the audio A1 is separated from them in a separate area or in a separate part of a truck, or in post-production, sometimes the editor does the audio too, and the speakers are right there with them.
Good, Courtney.
Yeah, Mitch kind of covered it. Usually they're in a separate area because a lot of times the audio mixer will need to ISO something or solo something to get a mixer figure out a problem. And you don't want to do that and kill your audio feed that the other people are using in the truck to run the production. So the people, the switcher and the director and the TD all need to be able to hear the audio, but usually at a lower level than the audio mixer is listening to. So if they're not isolated, they usually use headphones. And
next question.
Our last one comes from David Anderson in Seattle. Should I get a Ubiquiti Power over Ethernet switch for my studio? I use a 10-port TP-Link gigabit switch for my office at the moment.
I go, Tom.
Yes, I started down that rabbit hole real quick. I started with the UDM Pro, and I have a number of switches throughout my home. The reason I like the Ubiquiti is because I love the web interface for the control and the metrics that it gives you. But good luck finding switches right now. They're in short supply. I've been looking for one for, a couple months.
Go, Rupert.
The question seemed to be very specific about the PoE element, and the answer there is sure. If you need PoE in your studio, it might be a good idea. It's important to remember on the Ubiquiti stuff. I think Unify and all of their switches can do active and passive PoE. There were some times where Ubiquiti were using passive PoE for some of their equipment, which means it just shoves voltage down the line regardless of what's plugged in on the other end. So just be aware of that, and don't ever switch any of your ports to passive PoE in a studio environment, because you might go popping things at the other end of the cable.
Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, what Rupert said. I've got lots of them. They're great.
Go ahead, Jeffrey, real quick.
Yeah, I just bought a TP-Link PoE switch. It's a 5-port. If you don't need 10 ports, then get a smaller one and save a few dollars.
All right. We are now changing subjects and jumping into it. One of the things that I thought was important is that we start talking about these rigs, because a lot of us are using rigs around phones. A lot of them are iPhones, but it doesn't have to be. The Android does do this as well. And I'm getting feedback from somebody, and I don't know who. Let's see here. I think I'm gonna. Yeah. So what I think is that these phones have gotten to a point where, like, when I build training materials, I am almost always building them with my phone now because it's faster, it's easier. I get a lot done. And so I thought that it'd be useful for us to have a conversation about the kind of software that we're using, the kind of hardware that we're using to do a lot of these pieces, because I think that it's becoming a really interesting platform to do this. I mean, Apple sells this as this you're going to shoot your next feature on, and I'm not there yet. so I'm not talking about these being that way. But when I was in Washington D.C., one of the things that I saw regularly was reporters standing out on some street with a tripod and their iPhone and a little light connected to their iPhone, and they had a little wireless mic or whatever, and they're reporting back to RT1. For some reason, RT1, Russia's channel, would constantly be doing hits outside of my apartment complex when I was living in DC. And I don't know why. I think they just decided they liked the framing, like it was an any day Hollywood, whatever, or DC look or whatever. Anyway, so but I realized that we really gotten to the point where newscasters are using it. They're very powerful for training, and it's just a matter of understanding the tools, because the phone I can literally pick up the phone out of the case and just handheld things and get some pretty good footage, but there's a lot of great tools to look at right now. And so I thought it'd be useful for us to start having this conversation. The newest thing that I got, and I am going to apologize, somebody on this panel recommended this, and I can't remember who. You got to remember, I do this every day. This is the small rig. Who I don't know who recommended this. This thing is is that you, Tom? Is this your fault, Tom? Okay, great.
It's my fault.
Okay, great. I wanted to ask that because I think I'm going to recommend it for the show today, and I was like, I can't remember who did this. Anyway, so Tom recommended this thing, and I got 3 of them now. So yeah, he has. So I got 2 of them because I'm now going to machine something so that I can do this, so that I can build a 3D rig, on it. And I had been printing those, and now I don't need to print them because this has what makes this special is, of course, it's made out of metal, and it's got quarter 20s on every, it's got 4 quarter 20s on every, or at least 2, but often 4 quarter 20 inputs on every bit of piece. And Tom, I'll let you tell more about that in a second. That's all I'll say. But, and then of course, the one that I have my other phone in, Hosmuk actually sent to me, and this one has my wallet in the back of it, and then it has this little connector, and that connector will snap onto all kinds of things. So, for instance, this is a tripod mount for it, and I can simply just snap it in, and now I have it. So this way, and then it's in, like it's got a switch to it. So a lot of these things have started. Well, that's my little introduction, but a lot of these tools have gotten incredibly powerful, and in fact, this weekend. We're going to talk about building training materials with the iPhone or with the phone. And we're going to kind of challenge people to give that a hour. And so that's something to think about, but we're really thinking about this a lot because I think you can get a lot done. Let's go ahead to Bill. Are you there, Bill? Oh, I muted you because I muted you in Zoom because you were bleeding into my ear. Your headphone was bleeding into my ear.
I'm sorry. My apologies. Anyway, out for the rocket launch, I decided that I wasn't going to take any of my big cameras. I was going to leave my Blackmagic 6K here, and I was going to do nothing but my phone just to see how it went. So in terms of rigs, there's 2 things I wanted to mention. Number one, the biggest challenge that I've had is getting audio into some sort of system when I'm just using my iPhone. My solution for that original, and there may be better ones now, are these Saramonic adapters that have lightning on one end and allow you 2 XLR microphones and provided phantom power through a 9-volt battery. This is the best way I have found so far to get good quality audio off my wireless mic rigs directly into my phone when I want to do that. The other thing for the crazy thing that I did was a monopod with a DJI rig on top of it for stabilization. And if you'll notice that down here at the bottom, I have a second phone mount. I can't remember who makes this one, but it's one of the more robust phone mounts, pulls apart in many directions. And what I did was I allowed my phone to be on top of the Osmo up at the top, which was stabilized and was getting me good shots. Even four-wheeling through the desert, it was remarkably stable. And then I used Bluetooth to connect that to this as the monitor on the bottom, so I could watch the shot below even if I was shooting it up top, and it was all stabilized. It turned out to be just a lot of fun to work with because once it was set up, it was pretty just set and forget and shoot along. I could start and stop the camera from the lower monitor position. And so it's got me thinking more and more of shooting more and more iPhone and less bigger cameras, because some of the video footage that I got out of that was just really pretty. I'm shocked at how good those cameras are now.
Yeah, go ahead, Sky.
The same example. I was out in the desert and I brought my Pelican case full of Panasonic gear and full of the Blackmagic 4K. And we shot most on at least the immediate stuff with an iPhone 13 because it was fast. It was convenient. We could shoot in cinematic. So we got the depth of field. It was convenient to go airdrop, bing, bang. And I had it immediately. Now I do have some other questions that will be coming up, but the simplicity of it, it's hard to go back and lug all the other stuff around when, at least in the moment of a desert, when the storm is coming at you, you've got something you could shoot with.
Yeah, go ahead, Jeffrey.
So for CES, I actually did DJI Pocket 2, which is really nice. I know that's not an iPhone, although you can connect up the iPhone for a bigger display. And that's what I did in my rig. But what I want to show you right now is the rig that we used for the last year and a half during COVID when we needed to do one-on-one interviews. It wouldn't do the Zoom. All we were planning to do was record the video. This records it in 8K, and then come over here. I went to Android simply because of the ability that I needed to connect up to this phone from another location, control this phone, and we'd used TeamViewer to do so. And then, of course, it would record. I could upload it to Google Cloud, and then I could download it onto my machine, and then I'd have a full 8K view. I chose the Asus Zenfone. This is the Zenfone 7. They have the Zenfone 8 right now because this phone has a very unique feature, and that is if I go to the front face camera, it's actually the rear camera. As you see right here, that's the lens that just popped right out. And of course, if I wanted to flip it back, I could do so. The person could see themselves on the viewer, and of course, I try to distract them so they don't look at the lens. They look at the lens rather than the viewer. Otherwise, it doesn't look like they're looking at the camera itself. But this gave me an 8K view, which I could then cut back down to something that I could use. Other than that, the other things that I have on here, I have the IK Multimedia iRig microphone. This is a boom microphone. We also brought it with a lav mic if they chose to do so. Sometimes you just didn't get the choice. This is a Neewer rig cage, which can be completely redesigned, which is what I did, because this is actually the bottom of the cage, and I just flipped it around technically and flipped the handles around so you could put it onto a tripod. Got a light up here, which of course just a straight up panel light, which would then point down at them. I know it's a little bit close, but we were doing an all-in-one rig idea, so they didn't have to set up 5 or 6 different tripods just to get everything going. And then, of course, we had the power, just a basic multi-USB back and forth. And this whole thing is something like 8 pounds at the absolute most. So I could put it into a Pelican case, set it right in there, put a stand in there, put a couple cables in there, ship it out to them. They pull it out, set it up. I can do most of the extra stuff from there through my connection, and then record it, grab it, they put it back in the case, send it to me, easy peasy, as opposed to an iPhone, which you don't have the ability to do a lot of the control. So, and of course, with the little dongle, we can use it with Ethernet if they have an Ethernet option, which most of them did.
The one thing I will say is that for me, small rig has just kind of run away with all the additives. So they build the rig, and Tom, you want to show what yours looks like? So you've got, and that handle, I have one on here too. This is the handle that kind of you can have come with it. And what's really cool about it is they've really thought it out. I mean, this is the handle is adjustable, so I can loosen this here and then move my handle up depending on what I want. I've got quarter 20s on top of that again, cold shoe mounts, all kinds of other things. And then you have what light do you have on there, Tom?
Oh, that's the Lume. That's the Lume Cube.
Right.
So you have that available. You can just mount all sorts of things all over it. And they also have then the ability to use the moment lenses if you're adding those on.
And those just snap onto there. I haven't done that yet with the moment. I have moment lenses and I have moment cases, but I haven't. I guess I look at it. They do have the standard.
It's just a bayonet.
Yeah. So it's so that's pretty. It's pretty slick. Anyway, they have a lot of rigs that go around it, and again, you want to think about these oftentimes as a platform. I'm going to have to screen share this. I'm going to apologize ahead of time because I just realized I haven't I unwired my system and I have not rewired it. So I know, it's shame and more shame. This is, I don't know what's going to happen here. We're going to find out. There we go. So if you see this is about 5 years old, but this is what we used for Facebook for a long time because Facebook would give you a better rating. You get out to more people if you use the mobile because I think they're trying to create that behavior. So, but this one thing is this is a cheese plate that we just started adding handles to. But this is where there's a lot of small rigs that do this stuff, and then we have 2 Sennheiser mics on this. We have a mount down here. This is the Ceramonic that Bill talked about back then. We were using the 1/8-inch jack, and the reason we were doing that is so that we were putting Ethernet actually into the phone most of the time to make sure that we were getting the highest quality there. And then this is what I would use the small rig for now. And then we put a larger diffuser on top of the the light that we had there as well. So, I mean, thinking about ways to kind of use those as platforms, much like other people have there and I think that the best erector set I've seen recently from a hardware perspective has been the small rig stuff. Now, for one problem that I have had with the Saramonic stuff is that the preamps are not very good. So it's compact, it's easy. You have to have something that you have to be very careful about how you do the audio into it if you're expecting it to work well. Another thing to note is that I figured out that we could use the Dante to Bluetooth, the AVIO Dante to Bluetooth, and you can Bluetooth into the phone and actually have a whole mixer that's feeding into the phone if you actually needed to do that. So you have everything you have on top of a hardware thing going into the phone and it just sees it as a Bluetooth input. And so assuming that it's not a congested environment. Now, the other thing to think about is the software that you're going to use. I think a lot of us are using Filmic for that, but are folks using anything else? Raise your hand if you're one of the panelists, and in the meantime, we'll jump to Chris. I can't hear you, Chris.
A couple things I wanted to say. Alex, I noticed on that picture you showed, you had the little arrows pointing at the lens. Those little human things really help. I worked on a major cooking show many years ago, 30 plus years ago, and I actually taped a bunny on the top of the lens because we were shooting this guy with 4 cameras. He was totally confused, didn't know who to talk to. And I just told him, I said, talk to the bunny. Those little things really help. And when you mentioned software, I know this is a little bit a tangent. If you're using the phone microphones, I've been finding that a lot of times the stereo imaging of just somebody sitting and talking, can take away from the rest of a piece. And a lot of times I will mono that out. I'll say, in Final Cut, I'm sure everything does this. Final Cut, they call it dual mono, and then I just turn off one of the channels. And I find that I can make people sound better.
Yeah.
I know it's not a rig thing, but
No, absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, again, the audio is still the thing that takes a little bit more effort to figure out. To get it done well, in my opinion. Go ahead, Bill.
I do get more control in filming, so I'm in there a lot, but I also tried a lot to use just the standard iPhone app this time. They've got HDR and a bunch of other settings, and I've got some really surprisingly decent video by shooting through just the iPhone native app. It turned out way better in a couple of instances. Particularly, I did a sunrise shot at the lake bed when I saw a good little bit of pink in the sky, and just the way it resolved that was really pretty. I just really liked that.
I have to admit, I've stopped using the iPhone app for filming video, and the reason is very odd, is that the iPhone app is turning off video as an option sometimes, and I don't know why, and I can't figure out how to get it to turn back on again. Like it randomly, like literally will not, like video will stop being an option. I think it's some kind of bug. I've done some searching. And it is the most un-Apple, insane, stupid idea. Whoever wrote that should be fired. Like it is, like I can't, as a user, as an Apple user, I should be able to always go up and always have all the options that I have for shooting. And it goes into some mode where it decides it doesn't want to do that, and it's just going to give me my photo options, and I can't figure out how to get back. And it is, and so now I just have decided if I'm shooting video, I'm going to Filmic Pro. Or I'm going to shoot. So I use shoot in a specific way, which is I really like shoot because I can draw on it while I'm recording, draw on it. So, but otherwise I'm using Filmic Pro because I have those controls, and I find that there's almost too many controls in Filmic Pro sometimes when I'm trying to shoot, and I can't, whatever. So I have to figure that out. But literally, I've sat there going, "Oh, I'm going to shoot something. I can't get there." What were you going to say, Chris?
I've had that happen too, and I found it was another app taking the video camera and not letting go of it. In my instance, it was Zoom. And in your instance, it may very well be your Filmic Pro. Yeah, so try quitting Filmic Pro. But I literally just had the same thing happen the other day. I think it was when we were on the lake, and I'm sitting here. I can't get enough shade. I can't see what I'm doing. It's super frustrating. And then I realized, and I turned off the other app, and it was fine.
Oh my God!
It popped up immediately. Oh yeah, you can have your camera back because that other guy's not using it. Just double check that.
It could just send the camera to both. like it doesn't, like the iPhone, the phone app should never turn it off. It should never turn off my options. Like that's, oh my gosh.
You like to hold on to grudges and anger. I understand.
I'm angry.
Not as angry as me.
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I'm going to see if I can.
That's good. I didn't know. And it could have been that I was listening to office hours and then trying to take a picture. It's very possible. Or after
this
hours.
is some of the stuff I saw, and look at how much the truck is moving. This is little DJ Osmo, and I think it's doing an extraordinary job of keeping my horizon balanced there. And every time I went, so my experience was different. Every time I went to the iPhone app to create something, I got great results, and everything worked exactly as expected. So there's something going wrong weird with yours. It was really good for me.
And that's
It's not just me.
That's not stabilized in post?
There is absolutely no stabilization. Wow. This is what came out of the DJI Osmo and my iPhone. And it's really hysterical because you will see, hang on a second, let me go a little bit forward. The whole thing flipped. I was just letting it run, and then something happened when we were getting back in. You get some of this weirdness, but watch what happens next. It was just so much fun. I could fix it all because I was able to flip. But see, I'm hanging on the back of a truck and we're going through the desert, so I don't have a lot of time to futz with things. The question is it going to come back? And it came back, but it came back. Let me go a little further forward here. It came back and it flipped upside down at some point. I guess there we go. So, and it even worked there. I mean, they're usable shots because all I had to do was literally play forward, please. There you go. All I had to do was literally just flip it in post. But the whole thing, I think because I got thrown so wildly that suddenly I'm in upside down mode. But again, I could use it. I mean, it stabilized perfectly upside down the same way it stabilized that way. And I'll come back in a minute after I find the other shot. I got to go back out to my library and come back.
And of course, we just want to make a disclaimer. We don't recommend trying to shoot unattached to the back of a truck. Bill is a professional, and we just need to let you know.
I don't know. There's a few of you I would recommend you try it.
Who
more
was it
often.
that was driving that?
Don't try that at home. That's all I'm saying. All right. Next question.
Hang on a second. Let me just, this one will come up here, but I was so impressed. Let me get big shot here with what that iPhone camera did on the lake bed in terms of shots like this. I mean, I was just stunned. And again, this is a moving shot across the lake bed. And I'm seeing, I just stuck a phone up on a gimbal.
Is that when you were arriving, Bill?
That was Saturday morning, my arrival at the camp, at the base camp. And that lake bed is not smooth.
Right.
So there's a ton going on, and DJI just knocked it out of the park in terms of being able to get a shot. I mean, we're bouncing all over the place, and I'm just rolling literally through the front window of the car as we're driving. My wife is driving pretty fast across the lake bed.
Yeah. Next question. Let's go to the next question.
Okay. Next question. iPhone rigs. How do you mount your iPhone for the overhead camera shot?
Go ahead, Sky.
Yes, I use Manfrotto. Has two different things. One's called the Magic Arm, and then a super clamp. And I got the one that specifically had the 8/4, not the 1/4-20, the screw into the small rig that's holding my iPhone above the oven or the stove. But the tricky part was my rig that I'm mounting it into in the ceiling was loose, and so everything kept sliding down. So you want to make sure you have a nice solid clamp that you're hooking all of that arm into. But the armature of the Manfrotto Magic Arm is phenomenal. Just so flexible. With one twist, you can do all kinds of 360 things.
Go ahead, Tom.
Well, this was a question that was thrown back on Friday, so I thought I'd ask myself. What I use is a repurposed microphone arm into a microphone to 5/8 to 1/4 inch into a little ball head, and then this is a MagSafe disc made by Moment. And so you grab your phone, you put it on there, and it'll just snap on. Take it off whenever you're done. Very quick.
That's great. Now go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yeah, and those mounts scare the bejesus out of me. I'm not ready for them. So I highly recommend, if you do get a mount of any type, that and you don't get spring-loaded mounts. You get something that you can actually turn down and tighten from there. I have these on my rig. I have Ulanzi, but you can get many different brands off of Amazon, and they just have a screw right on top. And some of them will even have locking options on there too.
Yeah, I really like this one here. The main thing though is that you need some kind of arm. So newer makes these little arms with these little clamps. So you see these little clamps here, and this arm, and this whole thing is like $18. It's not very expensive. This one won't last very long if you put any kind of real weight on it. So when we do these for shows, when I leave my house, I switch over to what's called a Noga arm, which is like the beefy professional version of this that costs like $100, $120. So it's a much different one. So I have Noga arms, and if you're going to do anything professional, you want to use the Noga arm. For home, I use these little Newers. We've killed a lot of these because the friction here will slowly die. So anyway, so these are relatively good. And what I do with this actually is with my ultimate arm or whatever, Ultima. There's this little round area right here underneath the mic. And so when I've been doing some of the stuff we've been doing in after hours, I simply attach this right to that little round thing, and I have to turn the tension up on the arm so that it holds the weight. And then I have my little phone like right down in front of it for like the Rubik's Cube and for other things like that. I can just have it. And when I did the Android one, so it's a great little setup, and I keep it pretty handy because otherwise I'll lose it, and there's a lot of upset again. Then I'm angry again, as Chris said. We bought these for a long time as, kind of like chiclets. And when they died, we just get another one. but you can go through 10 of them before you buy a Noga arm. But if you need it to work that day all the time, Noga makes the best ones. Go ahead, Chris.
I've bought a couple of these off of Amazon, and it's $40, and it's so convenient. It clamps to the edge of the desk quite well. It goes fairly high. It has the extra arm, and then it's got the typical, quarter 20 thing. And I've bought one for my workshop, and then I ended up buying another one almost immediately. It just worked really well.
Yeah. By the way, one thing that's really nice is we start talking about these overheads, especially when they get too far overhead, this is where Filmic Pro stands out again because it has a remote. So you can actually remote into those cameras and control their zoom and everything else without having to go into it. And there's some other apps that do that as well, but I'm as a single camera output, because a lot of what I'm doing is using these as HDMI outputs into the HDMI outputs into my mixer or switcher. Next question.
Thanks. The next question comes from Sky Gleason. What external lens have people found helpful for their iPhones?
I think the best ones out there right now are the Moment lenses. They're in a box somewhere. I have to go spelunking for them. I have a whole collection of those that I got a long time ago. Bill, your mic's open. I have, Bill, your mic's still open. Somebody's mic's open. I can hear clicking.
No, it's not me, because I was just saying, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Okay, got it. Yeah. Anyway, so the yes, these new just as a side, my new little headphones, I can hear a lot. So anyway, the Moment lenses for me have been the most successful. I think Tom, you're using that's what you're using there. Tom, have you used those?
I've used a couple of them. I was wondering if anybody on the panel had tried the anamorphic lens.
I have not. I think I looked at it and I was like, why would I do anamorphic on a phone? Like it was like one of those things, like, because so for those watching, the anamorphic, of course, will give you a wider, it'll squeeze the image into your 16:9, and you can unsqueeze it later to get like a 2:3:5 aspect ratio or something like that. But I haven't actually done that. Let's go to the next question.
Kenneth Jones in Seattle, Washington's up next. He says, for less than 1/7 of an Alex, or $100 US, what's a good iPhone gimbal for on the run field video?
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
So a 3-axis gimbal stabilizer. I worked with Hohem, and this is the lower end Hohem X Steady. I think this is around $50, and just simply it'll work with both sizes of iPhone. It's not 100%, so it does do a little bit of swerving off to one side, But if you want something a little bit more stable from Hohem, for about 156, you can get the iSteady, which actually not only can do iPhones, can all do small cameras and things like that. And this has a lot more stability. I've used this many times with phones and with small cameras. Works really well.
Go ahead, Tom.
Well, it's not a gimbal, but this little small rig makes it really stable.
Jason?
I would go with last year's DJI stabilizer. You can get them. They're incredibly inexpensive, and I actually prefer the last 2 prior years to the current one. The current one has a little telescopy thing that's easy to break.
And Bill?
Yeah, I can't remember. I think this is an Osmo 5. This is the one I took out on the lake bed. It's really useful. It's really quick. Particularly, they do have a magnetic mount. And unlike Jeffrey's experience, this thing, which snaps on your phone if you don't want to put a permanent phone, is really strong, and the magnet is indexed. So you just literally bring it close to the gimbal that rotates, and it snaps perfectly into place. So it's been really easy to use and as stable as anything I've ever had.
I will say I've owned a lot of gimbals, and I have to say that the DJI one is the best one in my opinion by a long shot as far as features and stability and capability. I find their registration process to be repugnant, that you have to register to DJI to get to use the gimbal. So that is the biggest problem with it, is it's the most like repugnant way to do that. And so I've hesitated buying newer ones because I've just been like, really? You're going to ask me to do that? But unfortunately, they're so far ahead of everybody else right now. It's hard not to use their hardware, but it's a horrible idea. Anyway, go ahead, Jeffrey.
One last thing about using a multi-axis gimbal is know how to calibrate those gimbals, because a lot of times you'll have to calibrate them on the fly.
Yeah, but this gets into like everything else. The best way to get better at this is to do lots of it. A lot of times I'm trying to shoot lots of things. The reason I shoot things all the time when I'm out, my poor family knows that any outing that we go outside of the house, I'm shooting things. And the side effect is I've got lots of great photos and videos of my kids and my wife and everything else. But part of that reason that is for me to acclimate. I'm constantly acclimating my abilities to my hardware. And so I use pretty much every opportunity to go capture stuff so that I can figure out, like I'll be capturing USDZ, trying to do 3D modeling. I take experimental rigs, and my wife knows that I won't leave the house if I don't experiment. Like if she says, "Oh, you can't take any cameras," I don't do anything. No, next question.
Sky Gleason in Seattle, Washington says, in an iPhone 13, what's the difference between cinematic and video mode?
Go ahead, Sky.
Well, again, on the desert, I used both of those features, the standard video mode in the iPhone 13, but I did use the cinematic. And we also received a lot of footage from different people, and I was editing it all in a Final Cut 10, but the media was awkward and sometimes overblown. And so there's just a lot of differences that I'm not aware of that I need to know.
Go ahead, Jason.
Well, I'm not sure if I'm going to clarify much other than cinematic mode is like portrait mode, but for video. So it is a video mode that essentially is doing the facial tracking and the probably keyframes or GOPs of the structured and the unstructured light, so that it can be edited in post. I'm not sure why that lended itself to blown out footage.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, and we get footage all the time from other people too. And there's so many modes now, particularly on phones, where you've got RAW, some version of RAW, you've got HDR, and you can turn on and off so many things that just slapping something into a timeline, unless you're in the correct mode or you put the correct LUT on something, it's real easy to get out of whack. That was happening to me in the early days of my iPhone shooting. It's pretty much gone away now because I think I have everything set, so no matter what I put in a timeline in Final Cut, it just works. But it's a little complex. I will give it that.
Go ahead, Sky.
And I agree. I realized I was getting 2 different files with the same name, but they were different sizes. So also, I know on the phone itself, there's the little dial in the edit mode of photos in your video that you can readjust the depth of field to Jason's point. And so there's all kinds of adjustments and modifications. But again, there's just a lot. Maybe Chris. Yeah, no, Chris is going to help it. Here comes the answer.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I think the Ripple guys did did a video about the cinematic mode. You know, if cinematic mode was transparent and awesome, they probably wouldn't have a way to turn it off, to just go back to normal video. So it's good, but it's probably not completely transparent. And that's why there has to be a way to turn it off. But I don't have the link. I'll find it for you, Sky. I'm pretty sure they went through the thing in depth.
Well, and then you helped me do some things in Apple and Final Cut to also modify the clip even once I got it inside of the post-production, but that's a different conversation.
That was the HDR thing. Yeah, you have to use the HDR tools because we're not cutting in HDR, so we just had to dumb it down to 709.
And as a Final Cut user, I think you're going to start to see this integration between Final Cut and the phone that is pretty disruptive. You know, like
Absolutely.
where there's features in the phone. There are features in the phone that most people aren't going to jump. Most other editors aren't going to jump on. But you know, Final Cut and iMovie and everything else are going to become your kind of the app that eventually, if you really get serious about iPhone, I mean, if you're doing Android, it's different. I will say that I work with a lot of social media folks. I don't know anybody that uses the phone that uses anything other than an iPhone to shoot their stuff. The only time we see stuff with Samsungs and stuff are stuff that Samsung is paying for. So just so you know, like when you see those behind the scenes of people's TikToks with Samsung phones, Samsung paid them to do that, you know, because they're desperately trying to break into that market. And the iPhone owns that market. Like it is like 95% in the United States. Overseas, there's a lot of Android and everything else. But in the United States, it's like 95% is all iPhone production.
I tell you, we had a lot of fun teasing Tuomo in the desert because Sky and I were on Friday, I think it was. We were trying to finish some of our packages. They weren't done. And I was literally jumping up from the laptop, running out with my phone, getting 2 shots, running back in, airdropping them in, and going. And Tuomo had a shot, and I go, yeah, just airdrop that to me. And he goes, I can't airdrop. Because he was on. I was like,
so the ecosystem from a production perspective, if I was going to be serious about a phone, I'd probably use an iPhone for that. I mean, just because of that. There's some great lenses and great cameras and everything else on the other phones. It's just the ecosystem for editing quickly. Again, if you're like and as a news gathering, or like I used to use big cameras and everything else, and I slowly covering CES and NAB. If you look at the last ones on my channel, you're going to see me just using a phone. Like I was like, this is way faster. It gets done what needs to get done. And that was years ago. Nothing like what we have now. Bill, real quick.
Real quick, I just wanted to say this reminds me of when Camera Raw first came out, and I actually started seeing ads where they hadn't processed the Camera Raw. They hadn't gotten their brains ahead of this, new thing that they had, and they thought it was actually a look, and it was like, oh my God, you haven't corrected that at all, and you put it right on the air? You're nuts. When all these cameras came out with LUTs and people just didn't, the log look became the thing. We fixed it and they were like, oh no, it's got too much color. It's not the look that we're looking for. And I'm like, that's log. That's uncorrected. Like, why are you doing that? Anyway, next question. Jack Cannon in Phoenix, Arizona is up next. He says, what's the best way to get a mic into an iPhone 13 Pro Max when recording video, hoping for a non-Bluetooth option?
I go ahead, Rupert.
The best.
Best.
You can, yeah. I mean, maybe one of the most versatile is to come out with a USB-A adapter and then just go into whatever your preferred USB audio interface is or what you have on hand. It's just then dependent on whether the particular app you're using is going to recognize that. Most of them should, maybe with some edge cases. You could also come out with a Lightning to TRRS, I guess, and then break that out into to microphone and even headphone, and then come in with some kind of analog connection if that's what you're using. That may be lower latency though. Also, doing that route. Yeah,
the best way to start is the Lightning to, and you're going to break it out, and it's going to have a Lightning input for power and a USB-A input there. And Apple makes those for like $15 or $20 or something like that. Get the Apple one. None of the other ones work right. Anyway, so plug that in, and then into that USB, you can take a USB interface. Since you asked for the best, I would say that a USB connection to a Scorpio and a sound device is Scorpio. It's only $10,000. It's great preamps and everything else. And so that's the best, but probably any USB, anything that works off of USB that can self-power. So any field mixer, probably the Zooms would probably work. The mix pre's will work. We've done this a lot with USB pre's. That's the primary way we did it to get things in and out of iOS devices. But the best would be, I think, a Scorpio. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, the best would absolutely be a Scorpio. And the second best, I think, would be an iRig. But I mean, I kind of gave up on this a while ago, and I just capture separate sound.
Yeah, for self-contained, and I haven't tested the mix pre. I just want to say that I haven't done that for a while into the phone, because usually what I do is if I'm capturing stuff, I'm doing dual audio. So I let the phone capture whatever it's going to capture, and then I'm capturing mics and everything else into either a mix pre or a Scorpio or something like that. And then I'm bringing them back together later in post. I'm not trying to get them into the phone generally. Go ahead, Chris.
I happen to know what Jack is trying to do, and he doesn't want a desk solution. He wants to do this in the field. I would recommend, I think, some of the wireless, I know, I just don't know which ones. Some of the wireless mic situations, and even the more budget-oriented, and I know that's not best, have the ability to record locally. And like Jason just said, just do second audio. And if you don't have to worry for what you're doing, Jack, you won't have to worry about whether or not you're getting dropouts and stuff like that, because it's going to be a host and somebody that you're doing a rig, walk around, whatever, and you'll just get good sound on each person. And then a little bit in post, I'll teach you how to do it. It's not bad.
But the main thing is, and the reason that I wouldn't use any kind of analog audio, especially in an uncontrolled environment, I wouldn't use an analog converter into the camera. Like the Ceramonic I used because it was all kind of self-contained, and that was years ago, and it works. The problem really is the preamp. You need to put a good preamp in front of that, especially if you're in an uncontrolled environment. If you're outside and you're going to have a lot of noise and you're going to be dealing with a lot of things, you need great preamps. And I would say that you really want to think about if you're talking about best again, you need to get a field recorder that's got 32-bit float, that's able to capture 32-bit float in the field, that then is outputting into your phone. And then you can use the phone stuff, but you can always go back to that to make that work. That's what I mean. That's what I would really think about. And Zoom makes those, of course. In my opinion, the best field mixer preamps are the sound devices preamps, but Zoom also makes the stuff. And they like Leo was showing one. They have like a little one that attaches to your belt. Go ahead, Bill.
Everything that Alex said, but here's the thing for me. I don't think audio is getting done right unless you have primary, secondary, and tertiary, and at least one of those you have to be able to monitor in real time. That is my minimum for a professional job, because I can't tell you the number of times, well, it's actually 3, that multi-$1,000 jobs required me to have had that tertiary thing because 2 systems failed and I was down to 3. And if you don't have audio, you don't have a gig. That's just it. You're gone. You're dead. Which means that I want to be able to monitor what is coming into the system. Whatever you use on these, if it's terminating at your iPhone and there's nothing else you're going into, I think you're in jeopardy because you can't really monitor it off your iPhone in real time. So I would go into something like this, which allows me to do that real-time monitoring to my headphones. I would also run it off onto another thing, and I'd try to have a tertiary a third audio system that I could look at, make sure the meters are going, because again, audio is so much more important than video in most cases.
You go ahead, Jeffrey.
First of all, this is one of the original Ceramonics that we all used, and it was really good for the time. But of course, it's a little bit heavy. What I was trying to find was something. I have it from Movo, but a couple other companies do. This is not a non-Bluetooth lavalier headset microphone, and it had a little dongle. And the best part about the dongle is you take your iPhone, and then you basically place the dongle right here. And that's the footprint that it has. So if you have something like a 3-axis gimbal, you don't have cables running to the side of the thing. It will just fit right onto the gimbal, and then you can level it out, and then it would send out either a Wi-Fi 2.4 gigahertz, but there was also one that did UHF. signals. I think it did like 4-channel UHF. I have to find that one. I don't have that one. But then you hook it up to the phone, and of course you hook up the other end of the lavalier. Only thing about that is you got to take any case off because it will not fit. And that's always the case for all these rigs anyway, is if you have a case on your phone, you have to take that case off anyway.
Next question.
Next one comes from Fleety in Bali, Indonesia, and he says, is it a fool's errand to try to color match a stabilized iPhone rig with multiple Blackmagic camera 4K cameras in a live scenario?
Go ahead, Sky.
I'm going to suggest that it's a fool's errand to try to even match the same cameras with the same lenses. It's not a fool's errand. Sorry, I misspoke. It is hard. It's a challenge because getting even those 3 or 4 cameras to match is a part of the job. Now, to add a completely separate type of camera with a completely separate type of sensor in it, it's going to be a challenge. And sometimes if you can't get them to, again, keep the story moving forward, if it gets in the way of that is the what you're trying to accomplish, then embrace it for what it is and make it something completely different. Make it a spy cam, make it a overhead wide angle, but really make it obtuse versus trying to make it match. And then there's always something a little off and you can't quite figure it out.
You'll always color correct your cameras to the lowest common denominator. So the lowest, the one that you have the least amount of control over is what you're correcting to. So what you have to do is get the color correct exactly what you want on the iPhone, and then you're going to match all of your Blackmagic cameras to that iPhone because you can't get the iPhone to match the Blackmagic cameras. You have to bring the cameras to that. We do that with GoPros and other things like that until we started loading LUTs into it. So if you're trying to do the other way for you to match that is to put it through some box that's going to convert it to a LUT, so like an HDMI to SDI or the 6G or whatever, and you can take that phone, now you have a LUT, you can use the LUTs to correct. It's a little bit more time sensitive, but it's not a fool's errand, it's just a lot of work. Next question.
Color matching, so 2021.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael says, has anyone ever used the Unity intercom client on iOS?
I go with Rupert.
Certainly, yes. I think that's a great use for old iPhones. You know, in a static position here, if I'm at my desk, I'll have a device, an older device dedicated to it on a little stand like this. And if I know I'm not going to move, then I'll have it wired up to Ethernet and an earpiece and hardwired in, and then it's just a single dedicated device.
You go with Jeffrey.
Yeah, the first when we started using Unity, I had it on my iPhone 10 here, and I had tons of problems with connectivity. I ended up going into an Intel NUC, and of course it goes into my ear via Bluetooth this way. But as Rupert said, if you connect up via Ethernet, that won't be a big issue, what I've had.
Yeah, we do Ethernet. And so Ethernet to the phone, and then it's there. But you can definitely walk around and have it manage it. We've definitely used that. The big thing you get in trouble with is if you do Wi-Fi or cellular and you're trying to use Unity inside of a 300, 400 person location, it won't work. So next question.
Craig Kadoki in Toronto, Canada. I think I understand this. With the Apple adapters that offer a lightning pass-through, the HDMI adapter, can you stack a second adapter with it, Ethernet, or is it pass-through power only?
Go ahead, Rupert.
I have successfully stacked the adapters. I've used the off-brand ones. Now, they were unreliable for different reasons, but the stacking methodology did work. So I'm going to assume that the same would apply with the genuine Apple ones. Your trick would be to come out with HDMI first and then pass through to, what I would do is then pass through to USB and then keep that powered with the power supply. Let the power pass through. Also, that's really the most, it's important that the power passes through, other the whole chain's going to fall apart otherwise. And then once you come out to USB, I might even then go into a small USB hub so I can maybe attach some multiple devices. And one of those ports would be to a USB to Ethernet adapter. That's the way I do it. Now you've got a big mess of adapters. So strain relief and just general stability is going to be a real thing, because one of the weak points is just things getting moved around and something jiggling and that breaking a chain. So try and stabilize the whole thing.
Next question.
Next one comes from Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. Has anyone else tried Top Director to broadcast on the go from their iPad or iPhones? It has built-in telestration.
I don't think I've seen it. You've introduced us to a new app, Top Director. Yeah, it looks cool. I don't think any of us have used it, but now we know about it, and it's all your fault. So we'll talk about it more. Maybe we'll see if we can get them to come on and talk about it. It looks like a cool app. So there's a couple apps in this area, so that we've talked about in the past. So this looks like yet another one. Next question.
Rupert McRae in Dallas, Texas. Can metal case and rigging options impair cell or Wi-Fi reception? May be important in a live contribution environment when using onboard connectivity.
They very well probably do. I have to admit that generally, if I'm going to use it for anything mission critical, I'm going to put a lightning to Ethernet, into it. So I'm going to pull Ethernet from there. But I would be surprised if they didn't affect cellular and Wi-Fi. They spend a lot of time and effort on that. And that might be a choice of why you may use one of the little clamps that clamp onto the phone as opposed to an entire metal rig like what we were showing with the small rig. So those are that's something to think about there. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Just really quickly, I saw a teardown yesterday of the brand new studio, the Mac Studio, and it was interesting to me that they put 3 different Wi-Fi antennas on it on 3 different axes of the box just for this problem, because they understand that these antennas cannot go everywhere, and some blockage, some big metal thing could impede it. So they're trying their best to do it, but yeah, it's possible.
Next question.
Rupert McRae, Dallas, Texas, says, where do you draw the line between using your phone that you actually use as a phone for production versus dedicating a separate phone as a single-purpose production device?
Go ahead, Sky.
Well, yes, that has caught us out. And I guess the line was equipment we had available to us, because I put my phone, as I said, up over the stove, and then I forgot to turn the notifications off. And so in the middle of the show, I'm getting things popping in, fortunately not into the image, because Filmic Pro didn't let that happen, but I was trying to answer the phone way up here during the show. So that's kind of where the line is.
Good, Bill.
For me, I have 2 phones. I didn't sell off my iPhone 10 when I got my iPhone 12 Plus, and I put a line on my iPhone 10 for my personal use, and then I have a line that's a business line on my iPhone 12, and that's how I separate out the 2 functions. And it's really handy when I want to do something like I did with the monopod, because I have my secondary phone as a monitor for the primary phone as the camera.
Go ahead, Jeffrey, real quick.
When I did a lot of traveling in South Korea, I didn't have much space to pack stuff. So I had my iPhone 7, my iPhone 10, and I used the NDI option to bring them into my computer to actually do a back and forth, which meant one was a roaming camera too.
Usually I have one camera, one phone that doesn't have any personal information on it, or very minor personal information. And that's the one I can hand to somebody else and go shoot that for me. So it doesn't have messages or mail or anything else. It's also really good to use at TSA. Next question.
Mark Fisher in Minneapolis, Minnesota. How do you get some of the large files from longer recordings off of the iPhone for edit? How would you walk a client through offloading longer clips from their phone?
Go ahead, Rupert.
On Windows, I've found that for really big files, you actually need to use iTunes, like install iTunes and use the file transfer in that. And then also for housekeeping, make sure that iOS is up to date so it can talk to the latest version of iTunes. Make sure you're using a high-speed cable, not just some charging cable, and make sure that's plugged into a USB 3 port. And then, like I say, actually use iTunes to do the transfer. Now, how to talk a user through that? If they're not completely comfortable with those steps, then I would just TeamViewer in and white glove them through the whole thing.
Go ahead, Sky.
I've been using a software solution called Image Capture, and it, through a USB-C cable, goes directly into my laptop, and I pull them off that way. That seems to be the easiest and fastest way for me.
Go ahead, Jeffrey, real quick.
Same thing as Rupert did, except that's the main reason why we switched to Android when we sent out those phones, was because of the fact I could get into there and do all the work. Otherwise, they have to do all the tapping, and I didn't trust them to do that. Not that they weren't competent, but I wanted to be the one that messed up, not them.
Yeah. Bill, real quick.
Lightning cable into the Photos library. Photos library gets dragged into Final Cut and then cleaned out.
Next question.
You're James Babbitt in San Diego. How do you use both external power in and HDMI out of an iPhone?
Go ahead, Rupert.
Just like we said before, use one of the adapters that will give you those 2 connections, HDMI out and Lightning in. Use the proper Apple one if you can, and do the strain relief like we've already talked about.
Next question.
Next question comes to us from Danny Law in Malaysia. Which underwater rig have you used, and what depth have you brought it to?
I'd have to now look at it. Let's skip that one. Can you cancel that and come back to it? I didn't see that one there. I think I can explain that one. Next question.
Dave Kaufman is up next from Vancouver, British Columbia. I'm super happy with the portability and simplicity of the DJI Osmo 3, 4, and 5 series of iPhone gimbals. What's the next step up?
probably the Ronin. The next step up is the buy. I mean, the DJI Ronin is now with your phone or with any other camera is going to be your next step up from those. I don't think there's anything above those except for the Ronin. That would be the next step. Next question.
Chris Widener in Lafayette, Indiana. The small rig tablet metal with dual hand grip for iPad has been my go-to for the last couple of years for run and gun. Does anyone have a favorite alternative that would have 2 cold shoes?
2 cold shoes. I don't know of any. Although the main thing to remember is you can always add cold shoes all the time to all the other quarter 20s that are on the small rig. So the small metal ones, remember you can always add those to it, and that's probably where I would go with that. Next question.
Next question. Robert Soji in Los Angeles is up next with any opinions on the Shure MV88 for iPhone use.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
The biggest problem is that I think. Well, no, you can actually take it off, but it's usually something you actually put onto the phone. It's got the clip and everything like that. So if you're running like a small rig or something like that, it might have a harder time attaching to what you're using it for.
Yeah, Shure also makes it's another MV, and there is another one that does it has an XLR input, which is quite nice to be able to just put anything into it. I do before I did an 88. I find that the Rode version of that, I can't think of the name of it right now, I think the mic on the Rode is better than the Shure for the same functionality. Next question.
Joel in Mumbai, India says, what's a good MDM solution for iPhones keeping broadcasting and remote contribution in mind? We have a few under 10 kits.
Rupert.
You could look at Jamf for this. I know Apple has their own platform also, but there's Jamf out there. I'm connected to the Office 365 ecosystem, so you could use Intune also. And Zoom has some MDM too. I'm not sure how extensive it is, but if you're in there, you may want to take a look at that.
Meraki also makes the Meraki has MDM. That's the mobile device management is what we're talking about, and that means that you know where it is all the time. Next question.
Rupert McRae, Dallas, Texas. I use OtterBoxes exclusively to protect my mobile devices. What rigging options are there for mounts and adapters around an existing case system beyond the typical spring clamp type arrangements?
Go, Jeffrey.
As I said before, having a case on a phone or an iPad is always a problem when you're trying to put it around a cage. There are some cages that you can do at the newer that I showed you, some of the small rigs. And instead of spring ones, like I said, you get the little ones that turn down so you can tighten them down. But other than that, you have to really watch out because sometimes they just won't fit.
Yeah, there's a metal one that I've talked about in the past, and I can't think of it. It's not available. The one that I ordered isn't available anymore, but it's all metal. It has quarter 20s on the outside, and it springs, but then you can tighten it as well. You can lock it in place. And for some reason, I somehow moved it out because I'd swapped it out for this other rig. So anyway, so that's the I talked about it in the past. It's probably in some link somewhere, but it's no longer available on Amazon. They changed the name. That's why when I go up to it, I can't find it. Next question.
Sky Gleason says, Small Rig has a rig for iPad. What would you use an iPad for?
An iPad's a great production tool. I mean, there's been I think it's Padcaster so there's a bunch of ones that have all these rig stuff that you can put on. It's actually if you're doing studio style interviews, it's way better than the phone. You can add a lot more to it. You have a much bigger screen to make sure that you're framing well. It looks like you brought more than you did. So as soon as you start to really get serious about it, I think the iPad is actually a pretty great tool for this. We're running out of time, so real quick, I have a hard out at 9. Bill, real quick.
+1 on everything Alex said. I take my iPad a lot in the field because it's nice to have an extra thing. You can teleprompt with it. You can shoot with it. You can play back for clients. It's great.
Go ahead, Sky, real quick.
Yes, Padcaster is the tool I was wondering about. But again, do you add additional lenses to that? Because it's not the same kind of lensing.
I haven't, but you could. I think Moment makes them as well for that. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Yes, you can. And you can also put they have a little teleprompter on there for the Padcaster. For me, it's for that top director, which I really liked. And then, of course, Switcher Studio also is great on the iPad because then you can set up 2 phones and an iPad and do switching between the 3 cameras.
Next question.
Danny Law in Malaysia says, which underwater rig have you used and to what depth have you brought it?
I'm being thwarted by Amazon, because usually I buy everything from Amazon. I must have bought it directly from the site, so now I can't find it. So they're like the ones that I've used are like a little bag, and I've taken them about. I haven't ever taken them more than about 15 feet down, so I haven't gone very deep. They seem to be rated for a lot further down than that, but not a ton, like 60 feet or something like that. You think that, oh, it's only 60 feet when you look at a bunch of stats, but 60 feet in the ocean or somewhere else, it's a long way down. so so 15. Usually, anything under, you're going to take. I wouldn't take on a phone. I wouldn't really try to protect my phone much more than that. Once I start deciding I'm going to go to 60, 60 feet is like, I have a lot of things I'm going to do down there, and I'm now a professional, and I have scuba tanks and safety, and I have to think about how long it's going to take to come back up, and there's a whole bunch of things that happen at 60 feet that. So when they say the 300 feet water resistant 300 feet, you're like. You're pretty serious at that point. You should just get a real camera and a real
hire somebody.
There's you're talking about some serious work here now. Although it'd be interesting to just put a weight on it and just take a phone and just drop it down there and see what you see. Just before a shark, you probably just get the last little bit of a shark eating it. And go ahead, Bill.
I was just going to say the IP ratings on phones have been going up. I would not use it for anything serious. I agree with Alex 100%. And of course, as you get lower and lower in the water, colors change and everything changes. So you really do need a decent read with lighting and the rest of that if you want to work deep.
Yeah, but there's nothing better than underwater. I mean, we've shot some live streams from underwater. They're great, but we were using real rigs for that. All right. That's fun. That was good. That was good discussion. I think it helps us kind of think through a bunch of those things, because it's going to become more and more important. Thank you to the panelists. We can't do this without you. Great answers, great discussion. Thank you to our producers. Great questions, kept it rolling, brought up some great points both in the first hour and second hour. So thank you very much for making this a great show. And we've got green screen tomorrow, so it should be a lot of fun. I'll be showing graphs and scopes and things, and then we'll answer some questions there. And outside of that, we're going to go to after hours. So this is the part where we jump. Well, we jump and then we whisper. We talk about how great.
We jump quietly. How happy all those people that helped us
made it.
I did a great show, everybody. Thank you. Those names. Hey, JJ.
Every day you go, I don't know if there's going to be enough to talk about. And they're always credits.
Oh, that logo. Bye-bye. Logo.
Oh, bye-bye.
I guess that's it. Bye.
Hanging in there.